Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you call it, Get Covered Illinois wants you to know that you need to enroll in a health plan before January 31st. Having health insurance is the law. If you don't get coverage, you may have to pay a penalty of $695 or more. Coverage is more affordable than you think. Most people can find monthly premiums for $75 or less. Go to getcoveredillinois.gov or call 866-311-1119 to get free in-person help. That's 866-311-1119. Enroll today.
Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Our phone lines are open for questions or stories. The number to call is 661-244-9831. Make sure you press the number 1 to get into the queue. We'll try to get to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, our chat room is open so that you can post any comments or questions there as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific questions, comments, or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
Resuscitate, to revive someone from unconsciousness or apparent death, to make active or vigorous again. The idea of bringing someone back from the brink of death goes back to the late 1700s in Europe, and soon the life-saving techniques sprung up in the West, including the United States at the turn of the 18th century. But it wasn't until science and the general public were fascinated with not just the technique, but the experience of the victim when Dr. Raymond Moody published his book, Life After Life, in 1975, that the world really understood what happened and what could actually be waiting for us when we die. If you have been living under a rock and not aware of the amazing man, Dr. Raymond Moody is the best-selling, award-winning author, world-renowned scholar and researcher, dynamic lecturer, expert trainer and instructor, private and personal counselor and consultant. He has authored 12 books, including Life After Life, which has sold over 13 million copies worldwide, and the book Reunions, as well as numerous articles in academic and professional literature. Dr. Moody continues to capture enormous public interest and generate controversy with his groundbreaking work on the near-death experience and what happens when we die. He has surely captured our interest, and we are most honored to have him on our show for you tonight. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Raymond Moody to the show. Good evening, Dr. Moody. It is a pleasure to have you on our show tonight.
Well, it's delightful to be here, too. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Dr. Moody. You know what? It is really a pleasure to speak with you. And I just want to get started. I mean, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but in 1975, you were the one and only person that coined the term near-death experience with your book, Life After Life. How did you come to breathe life into this term that we're so fascinated with today?
Well, I tell you the truth, the way this came about in my life was I had as a kid, what I was interested in was astronomy, and I did not come from a religious family, and so I went off to college when I was 18 in 1962 with the full intention of becoming an astronomer. I went to University of Virginia with the idea of getting my PhD in astronomy. But I had been interested in philosophy a little in high school, so took a philosophy class, and immediately the first thing we read was Plato's Republic, and I was hooked and still am after many, I guess, that's a long time now. And at the end of Plato's Republic, there's this story about a warrior who was believed dead on the battlefield, but resuscitated and told this amazing story. And the first person I ever knew who took the notion of an afterlife seriously was Plato. I mean, I always thought it was kind of like a cartoon joke or something, but the fact that he took it seriously was interesting to me, and I learned from my professor, Lewis Hammond, that not just Plato, but a lot of these early philosophers studied cases of people who had apparently died and been revived. And so that was the state of my knowledge of it in 1962, and it never occurred to me that it might be something other than just, something that Greek philosophers were interested in. But in 1965, I heard from one of my philosophy professors that Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, had such an experience. So I listened to Dr. Ritchie talk about his experience, and immediately, I was very impressed with George. It was obvious that whatever this thing was that happened to him, that he took it to be real. And to make a long story short, I went on and I got my PhD in philosophy, and when I was a philosophy professor, I began to hear these stories from my students and my colleagues, and started lecturing at civic clubs and stuff, which are always, those civic clubs always need a speaker, so they invited me to come. And so, again, I found that always there was somebody there who had such an experience. So when I went to medical school in 1972, I had a number of cases I had already investigated, and then it quickly became apparent that, lots and lots of patients who get resuscitated have this happen to them. So, and I'd given a lecture to a medical society, and there was an article about it in the newspaper, and on the basis of that, a publisher contacted me and asked me to write a book about it. So that's how it started. But in terms of that word, the phrase near-death experience, well, obviously they weren't death experiences because the people got back, right? And so they weren't actually dead, but we do talk about people being near death and such. So that's how that term came about. But, to me it was an evolutionary process. I am still not religious, per se. And and so it's been quite a process for me, sort of looking at this from my philosophical background, but also my medical background. I have always been, known that the patients were sincere. That is, they were talking about what they thought to be reality, but my areas in philosophy were logic and philosophy of language and ancient Greek philosophy. And as a logician, I'm still aware that, that it's very iffy when you get to thinking about inferring as a logical conclusion that there's an afterlife. There's some real difficulties with that. So,
sure.
I mean, these things are obviously intriguing, and I kept at it over the years. it's only been in the last few years that I've sort of thrown my hands up and said, yeah, I mean, I guess, and I'm saying guess advisedly because it is just a guess. That's what, the most we can muster now. But my guess is that, yeah, this is a reality. And so it's been a long process, but that's where I am now. It's really startling to me, too, because, even at this age of 71, to me it's still very counterintuitive that there could be an afterlife. If you're not exposed to these things when you're a kid, it's hard to come to take them seriously. But at a certain point too, you've got to acknowledge some pretty astonishing things. For example, in recent years, and especially in the last year or two, medical doctors are waking up to this simply as a clinical problem because it's very obvious that lots of patients that we resuscitate have these astonishing experiences, and the resuscitation techniques are getting better and better. And so, we just have this tidal wave of people who are saying these things. So medical doctors now have sort of got to sort of at least listen to it. And so in April, I was in Italy, and which often happens that after a lecture, somebody will come up to me and talk, more confidentially, sort of. And this Italian surgeon came up, and a very nice man, but you could sort of tell that he had been through something that had really gotten to him. And what he told me was that he had been doing an elective procedure, and I forgot what, but an elective procedure, on a fairly young man who was in good health, and there was no thought that anything untoward would happen during the surgery. But in the event, the patient actually had a cardiac arrest, and the doctor was unable to resuscitate him. So he said that he was just beside himself with, what happened, and trying to understand, and also trying to formulate what he was going to say to the family. When all of a sudden he said the doors to the surgery rooms swung open, and a woman came in, and he thought at first this woman was psychotic. And you know how when you're upset about something, it's hard to focus on something that somebody else is saying. So he was trying to focus in on what this woman was saying, and he realized that she was saying, "My husband is not dead." And she said, "I was out in the waiting room, and my husband came to me and said for me to come in here and tell you he's not dead, that you." And so the surgeon told me that he really doesn't even remember resuming the resuscitation. He did it sort of automatically, I guess, and just so upset about the situation. But he said after a while, the patient did revive, and the heart started beating again. And of course, he was very, very, then sort of following every development. So he was there in the recovery room when the patient regained consciousness. And he said the first thing the patient said to him was, "I was out of my body up above, and I was looking at you, and I could tell you thought I was dead, and I was trying to tell you I'm not dead." But he said, so I went out in the waiting room and tried to get through to my wife to come in here and tell you I'm not dead. And that's just the latest one in a series of these things that I hear from medical doctors or other people who are present at the bedside when someone has a near-death experience or actually does pass away. And So, at a certain point, I give up. I mean, what do I make of something like that? And my logical scruples aside, Alfred North Whitehead said something once. He said, in formal logic, a self-contradiction is a sign of defeat. But he said, in the real world of knowledge, that self-contradiction is often a sort of breakthrough into some new area of investigation. And I think that may be what's happening now with this issue of an afterlife. Because from the point of view of a logician, the sentence, there is life after death, is just a self-contradiction. Because, death just means the final irreversible cessation of life. So to say that there's life after death is contradicting, is self-contradictory. But that's where I am with this now. It's really sort of startling to me, and yet I got to admit that it begins to look to me like that this is real. And then that raises all sorts of questions about, therefore, what is this thing we're in now? It really puts the philosophical question of what constitutes your personal identity into another realm. I'm very intrigued by these people who tell me, for example, that when they were out of their body and went through this passageway into another realm of light, that still they retained their personal identity, that they very quickly sort of lose interest in the physical body and move on into this other state of existence, which invariably I hear from people. They say that, this is more real than real. It's not that by comparison with that state of consciousness that they were in, that the physical world is dreamlike by comparison. Plato made a very similar observation in his Republic, talking about it's like getting us to imagine what if people had been raised in a cave and assumed that was the only reality, but at a certain point brought up into the world of light. And I've often, even from the very beginning, I started interviewing a lot of people with near-death experiences. I kept going back to that allegory of the cave, that people do say that once they enter into this near-death state, that what we appreciate as reality is very kind of dim and dreamlike compared to that other world that they say they visit.
So, Dr. Moody, can you say, have you ever had a near-death experience or something that could be compared to one?
Well, I've had a lot of interesting experiences in my life, but, what is fun to me is trying to figure out what is. It's always been shocking to me. I look around in the world, and a lot of people, the way they use the reasoning process is that they have some idea that they think already, right? They think they know. And they seem to hang on to it very defensively, and how they use reason is they try to build some argument that will support it. But to me, I can't imagine what would be fun in that. You see, to me, the fun of inquiry is exactly that. It's great fun to try to figure out what is. And if you load the deck, so to speak, and you try to make it work out like you think it should, then I got to think that somebody who does something like that they can't feel good inside, because by definition, we know when we're deceiving ourselves. But to me, the much more fun thing to do with your mind is always just to take the best rational principles you can muster and to follow them very rigorously, and and then just see what comes out of that process. And because you've followed the rules strictly, you can have a certain amount of confidence at what comes out that way. So, it's just, it's funny that my life has ended up on this note, because it's still not my main interest. The books I read are, I just love to read about ancient Greek philosophy and logic and psychology and so on. I hardly ever read books about near-death experiences or the paranormal or anything, but, it is, to me, it's, I give up. I never took it seriously, this thing that really goes back to the Greeks, too. We're still debating these near-death experiences in the same, now antiquated way that Plato, in effect, and Democritus debated about it. As I said, these early Greek philosophers knew about these, what we call near-death experiences, and they must have been pretty rare in that age. I mean, it's now we have techniques we can bring people back, but in that age, it must have been extremely rare for somebody to enter an apparent death-like state, but to be revived. But even with the cases they had, they set out the same argument technique that we use today, that on the one hand, there's somebody like Plato who looked at these things and regarded them seriously. He took it seriously as an indicator of an afterlife. But meanwhile, his rough contemporary, Democritus, took the totally opposite tack. Democritus was the person who figured out that just by sort of reasoning from the notion that two things can come into contact on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the notion that there is such a thing as a geometrical point that has no dimensions. And just by combining those two, he reasoned it out that contrary to our sense perception, that matter, what we call matter, is not a continuum like an unbroken surface, but that it's made up of tiny little bits that are too small for us to see. And so he was the person who formulated the atomic theory. And Democritus wrote about this, and just like Plato did, we don't have Democritus's works in their entirety like we do Plato, because Plato founded the university system, and so he had a school which passed down his stuff. But Democritus didn't have a school, so his things got broken up. But we do have this fragments of this book that he wrote, and he made the statement in there that there's no such thing as a moment of death. And he said even after the body apparently dies, there's some biological activity going on in it. And so he said that these things, in effect, are what we would call hallucinations or whatever, that just an artifact of the dying process. And, it's just really just fascinating to me that even after 2,300 years, we still have that way of debating it. And every time I'm supposed to be in one of those things, I try to begin to say to people at the very beginning that, the problem here is the way we debate it. It's when a debate goes on and on and on and it never gets resolved, you begin to suspect that what is the problem is not what the parties seem to disagree on, but it's rather what they agree on, and that they both sides assume, so they never bring it up to examination, and that's the thing that keeps the debate going in a sort of unproductive way. But I think that is exactly the problem, and the problem is that both sides, both the parapsychologist group, which I regard as just rank pseudoscience, And then on the other hand, the pseudo-skeptics who don't even really know what the word skeptic means. It's like these entertainers, as they are, and magicians, or kind of second-rank chemists or something, who just get interested in that. And because of their ideology, they've got to say, oh, I'm a skeptic. This is just, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. Well, by that very formulation, they reveal their ignorance. Let's put it that way. Because, and the reason I get so exercised about this is nothing to do with near-death experience. It's that I just love to teach ancient Greek philosophy, and when I do, and when I get up to the skeptics, then I have to go and I have to undo all the damage that these ning-nongs have put in my students' minds by misusing this term, because the skeptical movement was formed by Pyrrho of Athens about 20 years after Aristotle died. And Pyrrho formed the skeptic movement, and this is what anybody who reads the books can tell, by the way, which shows that these people haven't even read about skepticism. Right. But basically, what the skeptics discovered was that Aristotle had created the logic that we're using right now as we're talking. And it leaked out into the public domain because it's really a very efficient way to think about things. But if you think about logic, what it is, it's a set of rules and procedures for drawing conclusions, right? And so after this was formulated, Pyrrho said, well, what if we don't draw the conclusion? In other words, if you really bear down on your inquiry and you ask every possible question, but then in the end you withhold the conclusion, and that's what it means. As you can tell, for example, like, Sextus Empiricus was the philosopher who his book on the skeptical philosophy is the most complete one that we have. And he begins by saying that what the skeptic does is to continue the inquiry, that is, not to draw a conclusion. And they did this not to be cantankerous, but because they realized that you really find new discoveries with this, because if everybody else is rushing in the same direction to get to the conclusion, but you're trying to withhold the conclusion, then that opens up side pathways of inquiry that everybody else had missed because they're running toward the conclusion, right? So anyway, but now knowing that, if you read back what these people who, incorrectly call themselves skeptics say, is, oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. So if you unpack what that person just said it is, I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such. So that's the point of irritation to me. It doesn't have anything to do with near-death experiences. It's just that they're totally misinforming people what this really fascinating ancient philosophical movement was all about.
Well, Dr. Moody, talking about ancient history, your book Reunions, which is also another fascinating book, you talk about and you describe this ancient technique called psychomantium, and I found it to be really, really interesting. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. Let me give you a good reference to my book Reunions on it was published in 1993. But there's a really good book on it published by Princeton University Press in 2001, and the author is Daniel Ogden, who's a classical scholar at I forget which university in Britain, but and it's entitled Greek and Roman Necromancy. And this is just one of the most fascinating stories of history. And again, I know I'm so boring, but it's like the fact that
no, absolutely not.
The way I got interested in this was that even in my first year in college, I was intrigued by this. The Aristophanes, the comic playwright, accused Socrates of calling up the dead, and in his Aristophanes' play The Birds, there's this scene where the birds are talking about things they've seen as they fly around Greece. And one of the things they said is, far away in Webfoot land in the swamp of dismal dread, there we saw foul Socrates come calling up the dead. And what this is about is that these Greeks, the ancient Greeks had these places called psychomantions, or oracles of the dead. There were 5 major ones. And according to the historians, you read about this, that if people would go to these places and they would have some sort of experience during which they actually seemed to see and converse with their dead relatives. Again, I mean, this is just very important in the history of philosophy. It's there is some indication that some of these philosophers did that, including maybe even Democritus. And so this has always been an interest of mine since I was 18, but and I sort of vaguely keep up with the classical journals because of the interest I have, and I think it was in 1985 or 86. I read an article in a classical journal by Soterios Thakaris, D-A-K-A-R-I-S, and Soterios was just this really terrific classical Greek archaeologist. And I read this article that he did, and I had to brush up on my German, which I've sort of forgotten, but describing his discovery of the major oracle of the dead. It's the one that's mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, and that Herodotus writes a little bit about, and Strabo, the geographer. I mean, these were, the contemporary people wrote about these places. And what happened was that Soterios had actually, just by going on Lucian and Herodotus and Homer and a few others, he went to the place where this was, and he found it, and he excavated it. And based on what they found there, just by reading this article, I knew exactly what they were doing, because as a psychiatrist, I had studied the process of mirror gazing, and that is, many people, they gaze away in what's called an optical clear depth, like you can have the Aztecs use obsidian mirrors, which is that black, glassy volcanic rock, and I know that my own Cherokee ancestors, I'm told, used clear ponds. I know that Apaches used crystals. Different parts of the world use different things, but the Greeks often used bowls or mirrors. And you just gaze away into like an optical depth. You don't see any reflections. And under those circumstances, these very vivid three-dimensional visions appear, and you don't have any sense that you're making them, causing them. I mean, they seem to take on a life of their own. So by reading Soterios' description of what he found in this central apparition hallway was this big cauldron, and the moment I saw that, and in this room they had carbon marks on the walls indicating that in antiquity this place was lit by torchlight. And it just all made sense. They still do this in the Middle East today. They'll take a silver bowl, for example, and polish it highly on the inside, fill it with water, and top it off with a layer of olive oil. And then in the dark, by candlelight, they gaze and they see things. So as soon as I saw that, I knew. And to make a long story short, I just set up a mirror in a little dark room in my research facility, and I got my graduate students of psychology who were interested in it, and as word spread, my medical colleagues and a couple of professors, and we just started experimenting with it, and we found that it's really very easy, actually, to call up a deceased relative and have a conversation. So I just sort of figured out from the classical writings how they did this and put that together with my psychiatric experience of how you help people who are dealing with grief, for example. And beginning in 1990, I have really guided, I guess, hundreds and hundreds of people through this. And basically you just get them to talk about the person that who has died that they wish to see again. And, you know, that may last an hour or two, just however long it takes them to really bring up the memories of this person. And then you put them in this darkened room. I had a mirror on the wall and a very comfortable chair about 3 feet in front of it, and the person looking up into the mirror does not see his or her own reflection. It's just like an optical depth. And then behind the chair I had sort of like a tiny lamp. And, you know, I was thinking if I do 50 of these over 5 years, I'll probably get 5, was my estimate, and then I could write a little paper on it. But to my utter astonishment, it works very first time. And I find about, say, 50 to 60% of the people you take into this with no introduction except to say, you know, talk to them and put them in there, will have some experience which they interpret to be, and I will underline interpret to be, a visitation with a departed loved one. And subsequently, by the way, this has been independently reproduced by lots of people. There have been articles in it on Omega, is the Journal of Death Education, for example. Arthur Hastings of the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology sent some people out to my place in '94, and I taught them how to do it, and they've had very good success with it, and Arthur wrote about it. Also, there was an article about it in the 2012 Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, and, you know, it sounds just absolutely unbelievable, but the fact is it works. I mean, and you know, people actually do seem to, from their point of view, see the person who died, and about 30% of them say they actually hear the audible voice of the deceased, not like you would imagine or have a memory image of your mother talking, for example, but it appears, you know, it seems like an auditory experience. Almost all of the rest of them who don't report an auditory component, nonetheless, sort of describe a heart-to-heart or mind-to-mind communion with the person who has passed away. So, and again, my interest in this was entirely thinking, oh my God, if this works, then that just satisfied me, at least, that this is what this thing in Greece was. And actually, you know, once you have this sort of insight, then you can see it in the iconography. There's one really great scene of from a Greek urn of a woman sitting there, and she's gazing into the mirror, and you can see the image of the spirit in the mirror, and lots of iconography about this that shows this. As a matter of fact, when I took this information to Soterios in 1994, I think, I said, look, you know, he had a different hypothesis about what was going on, but when I presented my findings to him, I saw that aha look, you know. And so he went over to his bookshelf and he got me some some iconography from the Greeks that showed exactly that thing. He said he had just never put it together. He knew that the Greeks did this thing of gazing into the optical depths or into bowls or whatever, but he had never thought of that. But I think he was convinced once I showed him that you know, we can easily get it to happen with modern day Americans. And I say Americans, but now actually people have come from, I guess, most of the world to learn how to do this. So you know, I mean, it's certainly not anything Raymond Moody invented. This is part of the collective heritage of human beings. But
right.
no,
Right.
I just think it's fascinating that there is this fairly simple technique that you can go through that will enable many people to have just, what appears to be a very lifelike visitation with a dead relative. And on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I hear people all the time say, well, if I only had 5 more minutes, we can now give people those 5 more minutes. And it's been a lot of work done on this, too. And one woman wrote her doctoral dissertation on, she interviewed people who had this experience as long as 5 years before. And even after that period of time, they look back on it with with sort of a warmth and a acknowledgement that it was a very big thing to them. I had a wonderful ophthalmologist who came down from Virginia in 1991, I think it was, to my house, and he was mourning the loss of his mother, and so I took him through this procedure, and he did see his mother. And just about a year ago, I was up in New York, and this very guy stopped by, and we had a great kind of reunion, and he was saying that very thing, that I guess this was 2015 or 2014, I guess, and even after that 24-year period, he really, it was something that had obviously really affected him.
Well, Dr. Moody, you just talked about and beautifully described a simple technique from ancient history. But I think my next question is more a little bit in the complex aspect area of it, and I kind of say that a little satirically, religion. Does in all of your discoveries and in your research, and maybe personally as well, do you feel that religion plays into the near-death experience and life after death? Does it have any relevance to that experience and what we've all been sort of searching and looking for?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been trying to say something for many decades, and it's like I know the first time I tried to write this in my second book, Reflections on Life After Life, I noticed that the editor changed what I said because what I say seems to be so abstract. People don't want to hear it, but nonetheless, I think it's very true. And that is that, in a way, what I think is that these things that what people see in the near-death experience is what we have always called the afterlife. Because the way it seems to me is that I think probably the notion of the afterlife came from these experiences. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. In other words, that people heard these people who almost died, and they would tell them this. So I think that's what created this notion of an afterlife, rather than the other way around. It's like what a lot of people say is, people have these near-death experiences because they've grown up with these religious beliefs and so on. But I think it was the other way around. I think that the reason we have the notion of an afterlife is that people have had these experiences since time immemorial, and that the notion of an afterlife came up as an attempt to explain this, is what I think happened. And so in that sense, I just don't know much about religion. Religion, to me, is a very mystifying phenomenon. My dad was a medic in World War II. He was a surgeon and a professional military officer, and a very, very forbidding and scary person to me, And so he went away to World War II on the day I was born, and didn't come back till I was 18 months old. And, you know, at the time, I just didn't think about these things. But we just never went to church when I was a kid. And except when I was 12 years old, which I now sort of see was his midlife crisis. For about 3 weeks, he was dragging us to this gosh-awful Presbyterian church, which was a horrible thing for somebody 12 years old to be dragged into something like that. I didn't know, you know, what in the name of God is this? But so I have never been religious. And religion to me is a very, very odd kind of phenomenon. I've been reading about it recently to see, you know, what is this? And it's not easy to say what religion is. It's like there doesn't seem to be any one single characteristic. It's more like a network of characteristics. But incidentally, in saying this, God is another matter. I mean, like I like to say to people, I talk to God every day, and he's never said a word to me about religion. And, you know, somebody asks, and this is going to sound really counterintuitive, but hear me out. When somebody says to me or asks me, do you believe that God exists? And I say, quite honestly, absolutely not. And I go on to explain that, number one, I'm aware that any belief that I, Raymond Moody, could formulate about God, or any belief or opinion, would be off base in one direction or another, right? And also, if you think about that sentence, people say, do you believe that God exists? Well, ask yourself what emphasis, what word is emphasized in that sentence, and it's the word exist.
Exist.
Right? But as a logician, I could symbolize for you what it means to exist. But I cannot symbolize God. To me, God breaks out of the concept of existence, you see. I think it's kind of irrelevant. And what I say is I have a relationship with God. And it's not something I can formulate a belief about very well. So religion, I just don't know. I guess the question you were asking about, do people bring their religions to the interpretation of the near-death experience? I think the general drift that I get from traveling over much of the world, I mean, I've been to Asia and India and all over Eastern and Western Europe and into Russia and down into Africa and North and South America and Australia, everywhere. And wherever I go, I hear people saying these same things. And what I hear them say is that the main characteristic of these things, if you put it that way, or at least the most common one I hear, was very well stated by William James in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience. He said that the first characteristic that he relates to what we would call a mystical type experience is ineffability. That is, people just tell you there aren't any words for this, right? No matter how articulate they may be or how many languages they may speak or how many degrees, there are people everywhere say, I just can't, there aren't any words for this. And they do sometimes say, yeah, I saw this light, and I say it was Jesus, or a Jewish man not long ago said, yeah, I saw this light, to me it was an angel, and you just hear the same descriptions, as it were, all over the world. But people will say, and they often preface it by saying, that I bring the words that I'm familiar with from my religious tradition to it because they're the only words I have. But it's much more than that. And that's the sentiment that I get from all over. It's like, and I find it's back in the 70s, late 70s. When I wrote that book, you know, the great majority of people who had this never imagine that they might ever meet anybody else who had. So I just began to form little groups. I'd bring 2 or 3 of these people together at a time to talk about their near-death experiences. And it was really fascinating to watch the way they did. It was just like they were talking about some place they had all been, right? And, that there was this kind of, you could tell that they were talking about the same thing, which was really fascinating to me, that, it wasn't just arbitrary fantasies, that people would agree among themselves as to, and always with the proviso that, that the words are not adequate.
Well, Dr. Moody, is there one story or one experience with a volunteer or a witness that to this day you often think about or is most prominent in your mind?
Well, I still remember very fondly George Ritchie, the psychiatry professor, and my friend Vi Horton, who was a neighbor of ours, and who my son, it's a really long story, but my oldest son was at that time about 2 or 3 years old, and he was trick-or-treating, and we met this lady up the street who had this really phenomenal near-death experience. And I knew her very well. I got to know not just her, but all the members of her family. And she had probably one of the most phenomenal ones to me, but it's partly because I was able directly to talk to everybody who was involved, literally everybody, including the doctor, who I got to know pretty well, too, who was involved in this resuscitation. And he said it just totally changed his life, because he said this woman was dead. He said there's no question about it. And then she was able to describe to him all these things that, that was going on in his own mind, right? And during the time that he was trying to resuscitate her. And she went outside of the room where she was being resuscitated, and she saw, for example, that her friend had, this was a sudden situation that arose. It was elective surgery. She was 35 years old at the time. There wasn't any thought that there would be anything happen. And so the daughter of this woman was at home, but when the call came from the hospital that the mother was critically ill, the friend just put the first clothes in the pile on the daughter and rushed her to the hospital. And so Vi related this, and she said, Georgia was the name of the woman, and she said that when Georgia came to visit her, she said, why did you dress Kathy in mismatched plaids? And Georgia was just astonished. I talked at length again with Georgia about that, and she said, absolutely, that's exactly what happened, that she just, in the rush to get to the hospital, she put the first 2 things on the laundry pile on the daughter, and that happened to be mismatched plaids. And she said, when Vi was coming out of the anesthesia and so on, and waking up from the ordeal, that was the first thing she related to her, and she said it was absolutely correct. And then her brother-in-law also I had this conversation with, and Vi had seen him in the hall when she was out of her body, in a hall that was not just directly there with the family, it was kind of away. And he was standing there, and it happened that a friend of his came by and was surprised to see him in the hospital. And so the friend said, what are you doing in the hospital? And the brother-in-law said, well, I was going to go away to Athens today to see Uncle Henry, but it looks like Vi is going to kick the bucket, so I'm going to stay around to be a pallbearer. And Vi related to me, as he did too, that when he came to see her a couple of days later, when she was regaining consciousness, first thing she said to him was, well, the next time I die, I want you to go ahead to see Uncle Henry because I'm going to be fine. And he just said, and he told me that absolutely changed his life because he said, there's no way. And but I mean, I've heard plenty of people that same kind of thing. I hear this constantly, but the ones that really resonate with me still because they became such good friends were, for example, Vi Horton and George Ritchie. And but again, I hear the same thing constantly. The stories do seem to be similar the world over, and basically wherever you go, it's always the claim of ineffability, like there are no words. And also to put it together as a travel narrative, right? Like I got out of my body and I went through a tunnel into a light and I saw my relatives, I saw my life pass in review, returned to my body and came back to life. Well, that's a travel narrative. But if you think about it for a moment, it's a very odd situation to have a travel narrative in because what people also tell us was that it was not in space, right? They say it's totally spaceless, that spaceless. Space is no longer a factor in your equation, and that there's no time.
Right.
And yet, to understand the meaning of a travel narrative, it implies the notion of time and space. So, there's just many very great puzzles that are connected with this, which I am confidently saying have now been solved. I mean, I think that the real problem here is a logical and conceptual problem. What we need is a set of ways of thinking rationally about things that are, from our point of view, unintelligible or don't make sense. And I think that's perfectly possible. It can be done fairly easily, actually. You can work out what the rules and principles are for thinking about things that don't compute by ordinary logic, which is predicated on the literal domain of language. And but there are lots of things that are very important to us in life that are not capturable in literal language, and the notion of an afterlife is one of them.
Well, Dr. Moody, I am part Cherokee and I'm part Mexican, and much of my much of my ancestral history is deeply rooted in beliefs, whether it be religious or spiritual. Nevertheless, its foundation is built on understanding a higher power either within or above. And that seems to be what our world is made up today mostly. Is there a belief that we can take away from your work and from your books that may help resonate with people?
Well, I don't like to put it in terms of beliefs, but what I would say is that somebody who wants to, is interested in the notion of an afterlife and wants to really inquire into it, that I think we do have adequate information now to say that your belief can be rationally warranted. That is, that it's not irrational to believe in an afterlife. And I think that there are totally new ways on the horizon to think about this in ways that people never have before, and that are going to bring it closer to sort of actual rational confirmation. I'm really convinced of that. I am, yeah.
Well, Dr. Moody, it has been a fascinating conversation. And
yes, for me too. Thank you so much.
We want to thank you for taking the time to be on our show tonight. Now, are there any new research or projects that you're working on that we can look forward to?
Well, my book I've been working on, and this shows what a dullard I am in a way, but I've been working on it literally since 1969. And what I've been trying to figure out is what are the rules by which unintelligible things operate. And I've really worked it out now, and it's going to be published in France in the spring. And I'm trying to get an American publisher for it. So but the thing is that there are new logical principles that you can think about that enable us to think about the afterlife question in a whole new way. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm really excited about now. But my main project is my kids. I've got my 2 grown sons are great, and they're on their own now, and I got a great grandson, but he's got his parents, right? But I have 2 wonderful kids, both adopted at birth. And I mentioned to you that I have my son Carter actually is Mexican-American by heritage. We adopted him from Kerrville, Texas. We were there for his birth. And then Carol Ann is Native American Blackfeet from Montana. And she, again, same deal. We were there for her birth. And so, it's just a wonderful experience. They're 17 and 15 now. And, at this age, time just goes by so quickly. Almost non-existent now.
Yeah, it does.
So it's been phenomenal to see them grow up.
Well, it has been such an eye-opening experience, Dr. Moody. For our listeners, you can learn more about Dr. Moody and his books and lectures by visiting lifeafterlife.com. You'll be able to get his latest updates on speaking engagements, research, and much more. Thank you again, Dr. Moody, and we hope to have you.
Thank you so much. Good being with you again.
Oh, yes, well, we hope to have you on back in the future, okay?
Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moody. Have a great weekend and take care.
You too. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
What an amazing man. Right in the very beginning of the interview, I was actually getting goosebumps. I don't know about you. But I have read Dr. Moody's books. I have followed along with some of the lectures that I was able to capture online that he's done all around the world. I know he's fascinated with France, and so I'm not sure if that's one of the reasons why he's going to the publisher in France first. But I know he's infatuated with France, and he loves the culture and the people there. So this is a great interview. There were so many other questions that we did want to ask him, but we've only had a certain amount of time with Dr. Moody, and we certainly do appreciate him taking the time out of his busy schedule to talk with us. And so at least we got a little bit of a glimpse into Dr. Moody's mindset, into sort of his inner consciousness, as you will, to understand some of his work and some of the things that he's been thinking about. And it's kind of funny because one of the things that I caught on a most recent interview that I watched of him, I think it was in the Midwest somewhere, but he said the same thing also, too, to this person that was interviewing him, that he sort of raised his hands and has sort of given up. And it's sort of like letting it be. What will be, and whether or not that's just him waiting for his answer on his own, which we all will find our answers to the afterlife one day. But I think he's at the point maybe where he's sort of researched the obvious, and maybe with his new book that he just talked about, the finding answers where answers may not be realized. And I think that may be something that he's sort of starting to get into now, and in a more complex way, but hopefully it'll be something simple that the layman can understand, and hopefully invigorate and encourage research throughout the masses around the world, people like us who are just fascinated with the afterlife. I think he's an amazing man, and I'm just thrilled that we were able to actually have him on the show tonight.
Well, I'm still sitting here, and I'm just totally amazed that we spoke with him. This is like a highlight, that I actually got to listen to him and to talk to him. And some of the things that he brought forth, one thing that really struck with me was his statement about how what we perceive of the afterlife is not so much the afterlife, but we are describing it by the things that we already know. Our version of the afterlife is coming from these experiences. So that made sense. It's like what people describe, like the religious experiences, and that is basically all of these, all of the research that I did, all the reading that I did. That's the one thing that struck me, is like a lot of these experiences are all the same. And regardless of what religion you are, you describe it in the terms that you understand. So to me, I see this being of light. Well, if I believe in angels, if I believe in Jesus, I'm going to equate it to that. Where to someone else, it's almost the same experience, but in their mind, they're describing it differently. So this just leaves this whole idea of the afterlife and what we're perceiving it to be. Maybe it's all the same, but it's our perceptions that are all different.
Right. The individual components of a near-death, from the statistics and from the records and from the research and work that many people in the world have done, including Dr. Raymond Moody, that all of the components of a near-death experience from all of the witnesses and experiencers are pretty much all the same. It's just how we've interpreted it differently. Someone of Jewish faith will interpret it as seeing God, whereas someone of Catholic religion will see it as seeing Jesus, and so on and so forth. And so it's our interpretation of what we've come to understand, and what, again, we've talked about this before, what our own mind and what our own brain is able to comprehend. And again, with a limited amount of access to our brain, I've said this before, we use, I think it's 10% of our brain. So you can only imagine if we were able to unlock that door to our brain even 1 or 2% more, how much more knowledge could we gain, and how much more of a better interpretation based upon the experiences that we've had, either they be near death or not, how much more of knowledge we can gain and more access to things that we consider unknown at this point. But I think what it is that the components in each of those experiences that the witnesses and experiencers have, they're pretty much all the same, and so that has to tell you something. That has to resonate with the idea that there has to be something that happens when we die. There have been, and I have, and I think somebody actually, I don't know if somebody mentioned it in chat tonight or not, but talking about atheists, that many atheists have also experienced what people of faith have experienced as well. And so, does that go according to religion or not? And that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask Dr. Moody, because I knew what his response would be. I mean, I knew what his belief system was in regards to religion. I'm still a little confused about when he says he's got a relationship with God, and what that all means. It may be something that he believes in something. Whether that G-O-D name is interpreted for him is meant for something else, whereas G-O-D for you, Lucy, means the God of the religion. So it's really interesting to get into the nitty-gritty of all of it, but yeah, I think I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. There we go. It's gone.
Well,
sorry.
The one thing that I found, in all the reading and all the research and stuff, the incidents that I found fascinating were, like he mentioned, the gentleman, the Italian doctor who had the guy that died on the table. And yet the wife in the waiting room, he went to the wife to say, I'm not dead. And she came in, she told him, and the fact that when he was resuscitated, he said it. He said that I wasn't dead. I had no way of telling you this, but I went out to my wife. That right there, something like that, just proves to me, maybe not definite proof, but it leads me to believe that, yes, whatever happens to us when the body stops, we continue on. How is it that it can't just be a coincidence that they say that a lot of them say that they float above, they can see their own body, they can see everything in the room, but yet they can't communicate. And there was a couple instances in Life After Life where they talked about, in their experience, they were conscious, they could see everything going around. One person described it as, I was standing there, but yet people were walking through me. And the one thing that I could think of, this is kind of like my definition of a ghost. It is energy that's there. It's a consciousness that's there, but yet we can't see it. We can't touch it, but it has thought. It has a consciousness. It can communicate in some ways. I mean, we're trying to find we have all these gadgets and we have all these things that we try to use to communicate with them. There's got to be something. There has to be a continuation of what we see and experience here, and once the body ends, it keeps going on. I mean, yeah, I do believe that there's something else there, and I think his research points towards that.
Well, he brought up Dr. George Ricci, and not to put out a shameless plug, but the book that I had written, I talked about Dr. Bruce Grayson, who is a professor at the University of Virginia, and he had hundreds, if not thousands, of stories similar to what Dr. Moody just talked about that Italian doctor, and many that were completely fascinating. One in particular, actually, I remember, was about a family who I think they had brought their son or daughter, I can't remember if it was male or female, to the hospital. And the son or daughter had a near-death experience, clinically dead in the hospital. And when their son or daughter, I can't remember, came back to life and spoke to the parents, he said, or she said, whoever it was, said that so-and-so has died, talking about their other sibling. And they said, no, you died. Clinically, you were dead, and you had this experience. And let's just say it was a boy. He said, no, I didn't die. Yes, I did die. I went out of my body, and I was met with, again, I forgot the sibling's name, but I was met with, let's just say her name was Rose. I was met with Rose, and Rose was already on the other side. Well, the parents didn't believe him. They were saying, nonsense, stop talking about that. And the son kept saying, no, you don't understand. Rose is gone. She met with me, and she told me that I must come back, but she could not. And the parents still didn't believe. And so finally, the son convinced the parents to call the daughter, and the daughter was away at college in another state. And they tried to get a hold of the daughter. They could not get a hold of them until the next morning. The state police called the parents home and said, give them the bad news that their daughter had died in a car accident. And so those kinds of stories, give me the goosebumps, and they give a lot of people the goosebumps. That how can that be manufactured? How can that experience and story be something that is created by an individual without having any truth behind it? And so if those things can happen, and I understand fully well that many people today in modern times using certain special equipment can actually, or without equipment, can actually create an out-of-body experience. And science has told us that because they can manipulate the brain and either shock a part of it or do something to a part of the brain, you can actually instill and create this out-of-body experience or even a near-death experience. And so science has said that because we can do that, that it is only something that our mind or our body goes through and creates in a sort of hyper tense, stressed situation, and so therefore that's what we are all experiencing. But how do you explain a story like what Dr. Moody talked about the Italian doctor, or how do you explain the story of what I just mentioned to you about, the boy's sister dying and he meeting her, I guess, on the other side in the afterlife, and coming back to talk about it and to validate it? That to me cannot be explained any other way but that there is something. Now, whether we call that an afterlife, I don't know. I don't know if we can honestly call that an afterlife, but it is something. It's something that we are experiencing that is beyond science. It is beyond the space and time that exists around us here on Earth that we can logically explain and talk about. And so you can't deny those stories. You can't deny those, and I'll dare to say it, you can't deny those facts.
No, you can't. And even though there's not an explanation for it, it is something. And I do want to continue on that shameless plug. It is the book that we're talking about is Anthony's book. It's called The Death of Me, Consciousness, Spirits, and the Afterlife. And it is an amazing book, and it does talk about consciousness, and that's one of the things that you do talk about. But, maybe we want to put labels on it. We want to call it the afterlife. But what if it isn't really the afterlife? What if it is a continuation of our existence? What if it is a continuation of our consciousness? This consciousness that we have, that we're sitting here, and our body the blood is pumping and our heart is moving. Once this vessel ends, I don't believe that our consciousness ends with it. In everything that I've experienced and everything that I've learned so far, I still believe that this consciousness continues on. Where it goes afterwards, I don't know.
That's the huge debate that everyone has been talking about for the longest time, is whether or not consciousness is part of the brain or consciousness is separate from the brain. And so our belief, you and I, Lucy, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, have the belief that our consciousness is separate. It is separate from the brain and separate from the mind. It is not connected to the two. And so, I get into conversations with people about life after death, and I tend to not go too heavy or too complex, because when you talk about consciousness, it sort of gets into another realm. And it gets into a huge sort of, and we say this all the time, huge spider web of areas that you can get into, and it gets a little bit difficult. And you talk about quantum mechanics and quantum physics and all of that. And when you talk about consciousness, the idea is not the idea is, but if you try to explain how you feel sadness or how you feel love, that's something that, yes, your brain has something to do with, because your interpretation or your sense and feeling of sadness and love creates reactions within your body. And so I think, not to put a pun on it, but what I think is that your consciousness is communicating with your body, because your consciousness is the energy and the life of what people call, this is what I believe, what your consciousness is your soul, what people call the soul. It is your life force. It is what gives you, quote unquote you. It is you, this consciousness. And so therefore it has to communicate with your body. It has to communicate with your brain. It is something that works in tandem, because it is the life force that propels you through your journey, your existence here. And so when our physical, this is what I believe, when our physical bodies die, when this earthly material that is surrounding your consciousness stops and ceases to exist, the life force, which I call the consciousness, is what gets exhumed out of this material body, and that is what I call the soul, and that is then what transforms and transcends into the ether, into another dimension, into the afterlife, into whatever it is that we can understand at this moment in time right now, and what we can interpret as life after death. And that's what continues on. And so when you were talking about how, what if this is a continuation of our existence, it technically is, because our consciousness has retained our life here with memories, with feelings, with emotions, with all of that, and has now gone on to somewhere else. Now, then you get into the topics of either there's reincarnation, there's other dimensional levels, there's anything of those natures which, again, I don't know the answers to, but I'm fascinated and enthralled with learning more about that to try and see and understand whether or not anything fits together like a puzzle. But the consciousness, I think, is what is the root of everything. And just to stem off of that a little bit, I know you want to come back on and talk about that, but just to extend on that a little bit, you know how during the evening tonight in the interview with Dr. Raymond Moody that he was fascinated with ancient Greek mythology and ancient Greece and Plato and Socrates and all of that. And it seems as though that's where, I'm not sure if that's where he started, but it seems as though there's a magnet to this ancient Greek mythology, to his belief system of the afterlife and life after life. And the practices and experiences and methodology and techniques that the ancient Greeks have done seem to resonate well with him and seem to bring out more meaning into what life after life might be all about. And I 150% believe, and I know you do as well, that in order for us to comprehend the paranormal and in order for us to understand, what we're doing when, if you call yourself a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator, when you go into a haunted location, to understand what you are doing at that moment and trying to communicate and trying to reach out to a spirit or to a ghost or to someone, whether it's in your own personal life, a family member, a friend that has deceased, that what you are doing, and to understand what you are doing, you need to go into history. You need to go into the past and understand what other cultures have done, what other environments have, what is it called? I can't think of the word right now, but what other environments have believed, what religions are out there. All of the religions, study them. Even if you don't believe them, study them. Understanding history and understanding where things came from or what simple beliefs were back in ancient times, I think, to me, make a hell of a lot more sense than what we are trying to study in the modern day age right now. I think what Dr. Moody was talking about in ancient Greek, I think a lot of them have the answers because they weren't distracted with other nonsense that we may be distracted at this moment in time. But I think going back to the Fox sisters, and even before the Fox sisters, going back to ancient Greek, and going back, BC, going back to that time where there wasn't any interference with cultures and groups of people, where all they had to do on a daily basis was try and live and survive during the day and stare at the stars and the sky and the universe at night. And there was so much insight that was brought into their lives at that moment in time that we've mistaken, that we have not fully understood. And I think going back to those times, I think may help understand what we're trying to do in the paranormal field and what we're trying to research for now. I think, Lloyd Auerbach, who God bless his soul, he's still alive, he's not dead. We've talked to him. God bless his soul. His passion is giving education to people about the history of the paranormal and learning about the past, and that's most important about it. And so I fight for that, and the reasons that the only way that we can excel and move on and punch through that ceiling in the paranormal is to go back in time and start to reinvestigate some of the things that we may have closed the book on before.
Well, there's a couple of things that came to mind when you were talking about, like, the consciousness and that. The physical, we feel, the emotions that come from this body. And the only thing that I can equate that to is the human brain, to me, is almost like a computer. A computer can only do with what you put into it. That would be the consciousness. We're programming our brains with that consciousness. So it's the mainframe. It's the database that holds the consciousness within it. Once that brain stops, that information is still there, but it's moving on. That's our consciousness. That's what we are. Now, on the second thing, you're talking about history. One of the things that he brought up was when, they were talking about, the mirrors and talking to a loved one. I couldn't help but think about the Cherokee belief, okay? And the one thing that I have held onto, the thing that has resonated most to me with the Cherokee beliefs is that our loved ones always remain with us. He talked about looking into these mirrors or scrying and being able to have a conversation with a loved one. I believe that can be done, but I also believe it can be done without it. Cherokees, we do believe that our loved ones stay with us. We do believe that we can communicate. So to me, this mirror that they're using is just another tool. But this is something that has shown up in different cultures. He mentioned that other cultures have done this. So to me, that's a little bit more proof that, yes, the consciousness of my loved ones, of my ancestors, of my relatives are still with me. And even though I feel that I can communicate with them without it, this is a tool that can help others to do that too. So I found that really interesting that he brought that up. I really like that idea. It's something that I think I really want to try. Can we open up this doorway? Can we open up a little window that will allow us to communicate? And who's going to be a better person? Who's going to be more likely to communicate is a relative or a loved one rather than a stranger. I'm sure that when we go to haunted locations and there are spirits there, or there's some kind of entity or consciousness there, yes, they want to communicate, but I think that communication would be much stronger with someone who possibly is related to that person or has some kind of tie, whether it be blood, whether it be something. I think that communication would be much stronger. So when he talked about this mirror and talking to loved ones, I like that. I like that idea. I that's something I would like to dig into more, because I think that is a true possibility. I mean, I love that idea. I really do.
Well, not just to harp on researching the experiences of near-death experience or out-of-body experience that people have. I think also, too, what was interesting for me when I did my research for many, many years now, that in ancient times, and you can look this up, and you can Google it, and you can be on your computer for hours. There are many cultures around the world that have not been in communication with each other, have existed on this planet pretty much the same time from all corners of the world, that their burial ceremonies and rituals are similar, that the way that they cared for and what they did with the bodies, there are so many similarities. It's eerily hair-raising to read about how all of these different cultures handled and, not so much how they praised and how much they adored and mourned their loved ones, but the actual ritual process that they believed in. And I'm going, further back before Egyptian culture, how they all seem to have this. There's some variations in them, but there's fundamentally this, single foundation that they all sort of built upon. And it's interesting to try and understand how that is and how that can be if none of these cultures communicated or met with each other, never understood any other culture or even any other language for that matter at that moment in time. So how could that be? How could they all feel that if you did this with the body and you use this cloth or you use this material, whatever it was, that they would be sent off into what they believed, into the afterlife, into the universe, into the heavens above. Even I'm talking about even before, Catholic religion, all of this stuff. It's eerily interesting to understand it and try and find out what those cultures and religions and societies believed in at the moment. A lot of people talk about and try to the skeptics out there try and say, well, the way that I equate death in the afterlife is, well, what do you remember before being born? Nothing. And so their answer is, well, because you don't really remember anything before you're born, that same existence, that same experience is what happens after you die. There's nothing. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that idea that because you don't remember anything before you're born, that is the same result as after your death. Because I believe that the consciousness, which is, and not to debate what you were saying before, that we're computers, that we're sort of data entry and putting everything into our consciousness. I think our consciousness is retaining all of the experiences that we have, but I think it has a life of its own, and it's always had a life. And so, maybe our consciousness, our spirit, our soul, whatever you want to call it, this consciousness was brought into this body. It was brought into this life at this moment in time for whatever reason. I think this consciousness was not created because we were born. I think our bodies were born and the consciousness was brought into it. And again, there's the interpretations where God has breathed spirit and life and soul into the body, and that's, the religious point of it. But I think to that point, it has some factual notes to it that may not be the quote-unquote God, but it may be whatever it is that, if there is something that is governing consciousness, our spirit and our soul, that the breath of this consciousness came into the body. That's my belief. But just to wrap up what I was just talking about, I think it's important also, too, to not just research near-death experiences, but also try and understand the burial practices or and I brought this up again, I hate to do a shameless plug, but in my book that I wrote, I talked about trying to understand what it was like for the very first person, very first human on this planet to experience someone or something dying in front of them, to never have the knowledge of what death is, and then to experience it right in front of you. What went on in that person, in that human body at that moment? What were they thinking? What did they think happened? How did they interpret? How did they understand? And how did it evolve into the early ancients and up until modern times now to what we believe as what death is all about? That to me was interesting to try and explore.
Well, one of the things that I thought about too was the reincarnation aspect of it. How is it that, I do believe that this is the consciousness that we have, and it just doesn't start when you're born. I mean, how is it that people have experiences, that we remember things, or that certain places or certain times are very familiar to us? I mean, for Dr. Moody, he seems to be very, very tied to the Greek, ancient Greeks. Who's to say that maybe his consciousness is tied in some way? Maybe his consciousness has been there. I mean, we all read stories about people that are so tied to something. With me, it's England. I don't know what it is. I have no ties to England whatsoever. But yet, when I set foot there, it was so familiar to me. So, is this part of my consciousness that that has been here before? Is it a continuation? Is it a reawakening of those memories in the consciousness? Is this something that we just, I don't want to say recycle, but we just continue on, and maybe we have different, I don't want to say chapters, episodes, but it's still all the same consciousness. How can those memories be in one person's mind? How can we know this unless we've experienced it before?
It's an amazing topic to get into and to discuss. And, I do want to thank Dr. Raymond Moody for coming on the show tonight. And if you haven't, if you want, check out his website, lifeafterlife.com, and you can find, I think he's even got some links there to some of his lectures that he's done, which are pretty amazing. And I've watched some of the interviews, some of his past interviews that he's done on YouTube. There's a bunch of them there that you can actually listen to, and it's just fascinating to just hear him speak about it. And I don't want to treat him as though he's God, but he makes a lot of sense with a lot of the things that he's talked about, and he's been in the industry for a very long time, and so it should be respected to at least try and understand what his stance is and what he's written about and talked about, if you're really interested in the afterlife and what this is all about. And I've said this before, and we've talked about this, that when I talk about what we do as being a paranormal investigator, as being host on a show, on a paranormal show, people sort of close one eye and give you a weird look. They think it's a little bit morbid and strange, and it's so gloomy and whatever, talking about death all the time. But my response to them is this, and everyone who's listening can take it and use it themselves if they'd like, that learning about the afterlife and researching about the afterlife, to me, is not morbid. What it has done for me is actually helped me to understand and appreciate and research life and how I live my life and how people live their lives. It's helped me understand, my own existence, my loved one's existence, what we do here. It doesn't just focus on death and the afterlife and any morbid aspect of that nature that you may think. It actually, for the most part, has taught me more about my life and my journey and the existence here on Earth than it has about the afterlife itself. And so, to me, that's not morbid. And so it's what many other, psychiatrists and psychologists and evangelicals and all these other people, they try and do by talking about things in a quote-unquote better light than I do or what we do. I think talking about the afterlife and death has actually made me appreciate the life that I live right now much, much more. And so it's not morbid to me, and it shouldn't seem morbid to anyone else, and that's how I explain it to people.
Well, it's never been morbid to me. Never. Some people think that I'm fascinated with death, but it's not morbid. It is, to me, it is a celebration of the life that we have now. It has taught me not to fear death, and death is not the end to me. It's just the movement on to the next level, whatever that is, to the next chapter. It's amazing and it's fascinating, and the more I learn, you're right, the more I do appreciate the life that I have now. But I also look at it that this is just one chapter in this big, beautiful book that is my life. and everyone has their own book, and they have their own chapters. And what you do in this life may affect you in the next. That's what I believe. And I think the more we learn and the more we reach out and try to communicate and the more we try to understand, it does help you deal with your life on a daily basis. And I love it, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop doing it. It's helped me to understand my ancestors and what they believed, and it kind of helps me understand what the rest of the world believes. And we may never, ever, ever totally agree. The world is never going to agree on what death is and what's on the other side. But the more we research it and the more we look at it and the more we try to understand it, it is going to make it something that is not so scary. And I think that's the best thing for me.
Well, I think what we do in this field, it's so funny, not funny, but it's, I sort of sit there and, ponder the question why when I watch CNN or the news or whatever in regards to what's going on around the world with ISIS and everything. It seems as though, and I'm not saying this derogatory or anything, but it seems as though religion has become an evil. It's kind of an oxymoron to say it, but religion has become the evil in this day and age right now because one's belief has so consumed groups and societies that theirs should be the only thing that is in existence, and everything else should be, just blown away to pieces. And so understanding and researching the afterlife and what we were just talking about before about, learning and understanding about all religions, learning about history in ancient times has given me a better understanding, not that I believe or not believe in religion, because I've said this before, I don't know where I stand on religion at this point in my life, but just learning about all of the religions, I see similarities. So there's got to be some truth to something. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be truth to something. And to understand stories and to hear about experiences from people and how they've been brought back to life from death and what has gone on, what has happened, it has given me a better understanding as to a belief that we all go to an afterlife somewhere. What it is specifically, I don't think matters at this point, but there is a life after life, as Dr. Moody titles his book. There is life after life. And so what is the point of the issues that we have at this day and age now with what's going on in the world? What is the point? And so I sit there and I just say, why? Why does this have to happen? Why can't anyone understand? And I'm not going to be able to change anything. I'm not going to be able to do anything to make a dent in what is going on. But I think if more people open up their minds and try and understand what the world is all about, without having this prejudice that mine is better than yours, not that it's going to take you away from your own belief, but it gives you a better understanding of the world and a better understanding of your own belief. I just am oddly weirded out and dumbstruck at what is going on. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent there, but just to wrap this up for a little bit, again, thanking Dr. Raymond Moody for tonight. Awesome interview. And, check him out online. You will open up your minds to things that you probably were never even thinking of before. So with that said, I know we've got about 15, 16 minutes left in the show, and I know this is part of your closing, Lucy.
But let's talk about it.
But let's talk about it. Next week is going to be a really interesting show for you guys. We've both been itching to get out there for a very long time now. When was the last time that we went on an investigation?
It was Saddamsville. It was like in July.
It seems like 100,000 years ago.
It's been a while. No, it was Hillview. It was in the beginning of August or something like that.
Yeah, somewhere.
It's been a while.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
It's been too long anyway. So next week we are actually going to be on an investigation, and we're going to take you guys along with us. It's going to be a live broadcast. We're going to do it, most likely it's going to be on YouTube only, and not on here on Blog Talk Radio. That way you're able to hear and see Lucy and I actually doing an investigation. And we are going to Naples, New York. Not too far. Well, it's a 5-hour drive from my home. But Lucy's going to be flying into New York next week, and we're both going to be heading up to Naples, New York, to investigate the Naples Hotel.
The historic Naples Hotel. It's a 32-room hotel, and it was built in 1865, and it has had a history of hauntings. There are nothing really negative, but there is activity there. Supposedly there are 6 resident ghosts that are there, and they include what they said a woman and her children. Mm-hmm. Supposedly there is a gentleman who killed himself up in the attic that they call Topper.
Right.
Ghost hunters did investigate there.
A few years back.
And we're going to go there.
Yeah, when the ghost hunters were there, when Jason and Grant were there, they actually had, if you catch that episode, I forgot what the episode was called. I think if you just go to YouTube and type in Ghost Hunters Naples, like Naples, Italy, if you type in Naples Hotel, you'll be able to pull up the actual episode that they went to. It's a few years back. They had some amazing evidence from there. Pictures moving, a loud woman screaming, and it was audible. That wasn't an EVP. That was a disembodied voice, and a couple other things I can't remember. So Lucy and I actually have the privilege of having the whole entire, hopefully, we're going to have the whole entire hotel all to ourselves that day. And we'll be able to, I think are we staying on the 3rd floor? Is that
we're staying on the 3rd floor.
That's where our room is. Right, that's where our room is. And that's where Topper had hung himself. That's where they say it, hung himself, and where the most activity is. But we're also going to have access to I believe the dining room, the bar, and the basement.
The basement, after that, the hallway.
Right, after that closes to the public, I think around 1 a.m., so after that we'll be able to go down there and investigate that area. But we're going to be live on YouTube, again, crossing my fingers, hoping it works. We've had good luck lately in the last few times we've done this. So we'll be live on YouTube, and you'll be able to hear and see the investigation for yourself. What we've able to do is also, on many other investigations, not only allow, give you the privilege of actually seeing it and being there and helping us investigate just from the comfort of your couch, but also, too, to call in. And there'll be an opportunity at some point for any listeners if they want to call in, and we'll put you on the speakerphone. And you'll be able to actually speak to the spirits. Maybe it'll be up on the 3rd floor. We can talk to Topper, and you guys can talk to Topper, ask questions, and, help along with the investigation so that, who knows, maybe we may get some energy from your side into that room as you are speaking, and help facilitate some sort of communication. We're going to bring all of our equipment. Lucy has a new camera, I believe, where she's hoping to get a new camera.
I'm hoping my camera will be delivered by then. I ordered a new full spectrum camera. One thing I'm really excited about, there are several rooms that are haunted, and if they are empty, we have access to all of those rooms. They're going to open up all the rooms for us, so we can go to any one of the haunted rooms that we want to. We could do investigations there.
I think so. The major one is the sake room, which I think we have access already to that as well.
Yes,
I believe.
Yes.
Which that's I think the first or second most haunted room in the place. And so if there's nobody else in the hotel, which most likely will be, there won't be anybody else there because of the location. It's, upstate New York, and the East Coast and upstate New York is freezing cold. Nobody goes up there for anything. So it most likely will be up there. I'm hoping it's going to be empty. And so we'll have the whole entire place ourselves. And you'll be able to come along with us and experience it as well. So if you haven't been able to do any of this on your own, or if you've done it and haven't done it in a long time and just are itching to do it, tune in next week, next Friday night, and join along with us. If you guys actually go to our Facebook page, Paranormal Review Radio, just type that in Facebook, you can... You'll be able to see all the links to the YouTube channel and the promotions that we'll have for it, so that you'll be able to log on. I'm not sure if we're going to do it at 9 p.m. Eastern Time or 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I think it all depends on when we're set up or whatever. But I think during this week we're going to let you guys know what that time will be. So hope you guys will be able to join us.
We still have to plan out what we're going to do during the night. I mean, it has been a while since we've investigated a hotel, since the Stanley Hotel. I mean, and I'm excited about this one. I really am. I mean, it's hopefully if the hotel is empty, that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
It's an old hotel. It's got wooden floors, so which means footsteps. That's, things like that. That's what I'm excited for. I'm really getting super excited about this.
Well, I've also started to do a lot of research, and of course, there's Native American history to the land. There is, I believe, Revolutionary War history. There's presidential history, I know, at the hotel. I think one of the presidents actually spoke on the porch of the hotel, but has nothing to do with any of the haunted experiences. So a lot of the times when we go to a haunted location, we dig up a lot of research, a lot of history, and we utilize that history, especially the Native American side of it. And I know it's the Sioux Iroquois Indians who were in that area. So I'm doing a lot of history on the Sioux Iroquois. And with that, what we do is we try and bring music that relates to whatever Native American tribe it is, to help talk to them. Because, before the Naples Hotel, if anything, it was land that was there. And what was on that land, we don't know. But there could have been some sort of connection with Native Americans there. And so it's not just the building itself, it's the environment, it's the area within. And so we like to welcome and communicate with those spirits as well, not just with Topper, who may have hung himself on the third floor, or mother and child, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be an interesting night.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. It's been too long. So that's going to be next week. And, it's, you guys, please, the YouTube experience, I really think that really does. I love it, because it brings you into what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And I love sharing it.
I think it'll actually be the first time that I may be able to use the night vision camera.
That's right.
For YouTube. So you guys will be able to see night vision along with us, which will help with the communication, so we won't have to have any lights on or anything like that. So look for that, even though it's, you look at green screen, which is what night vision is basically. It's going to be interesting. And actually, Lucy, I didn't tell you this, but I actually just found something out online that we may use, so something different that we have never used or never done before. And I'll talk to you about it after tonight, but maybe we'll introduce it if it's worth it. I'll talk to you about it and see if it's worth it, and then I'll introduce it to everybody that night when we're there. It's sort of like the spirit box, but not a spirit box. And it's not an app that, people talk about these voice calm things or whatever those things are, those apps online. It's not that. But it's in the same family. It's like a distant cousin of it. So it's interesting. I'll talk to you about it after the show.
Okay. So anyway, we got 5 minutes left, so let me get to some business here. The Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week. And this week, she follows us on Twitter, and she follows us on YouTube. It is Valerie Polson of Dayton, Ohio. And Valerie recently tweeted about us. Yes, we are on Twitter. It's at Para Review Radio. And she tweeted that she loves the show. So, Valerie, thank you so much for watching our videos on YouTube. Thank you for following us, and thank you for listening. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. And don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on Facebook at Paranormal Review Radio. Or subscribe to us on YouTube. Just type in Paranormal Review Radio on YouTube, and you'll catch our channel there.
Well, you know what? Tonight just really resonated with me so much. But you know what? Death is a very hard thing to talk about. And we all have this fear of the unknown. And there's nothing more uncertain and frightening than the end of our time on this plane. Dr. Moody's work has helped to make the next part of the journey easier to talk about. While we still don't know what is going to happen to us when we move on, he's started a conversation that we all need to have in the course of our search for answers. We hope tonight's conversation has helped you to see that death is not the end. It's only the beginning of the next part of our journey through life. We really do want to thank Dr. Moody for joining us tonight. It was truly an honor to speak with him, and we look forward to hearing more from him in the future. So, as we talked about it, we're going to continue the search for answers next week, and we're going to do that live investigation. We're going to be traveling. Again, it's the Naples Hotel in Naples, New York. As I said, the hotel was The hotel was built in 1865. There's 32 rooms. They're haunted. What are we going to find? We're going to find out. We want you to be sure and join us next week. Become part of the investigation. Call us. Let us know what you want to hear. If you see something, let us know. Are we going to make contact? Are we going to make some new friends on the other side? Find out next Friday night, okay? Thank you, everyone, for being part of our paranormal family. You are the reason that we do this show every single week, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, Anthony, for everything you do to make Friday night so special. So, until next week, dear friends, keep your minds and your hearts open and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio. Paranormal Review Radio.